All right, everyone, welcome back to part two of our read through of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Speckled Band. Remember to have up your text or to follow along as I'm going through the text here, and to have open in another tab your Adventure of the Speckled Band worksheet, because as you can see here, we're going to add a bunch more clues as we go through the story, and we're even going to add to our means, motive, and opportunity to start to find out who might have committed this crime here that we're about to get to. So let's jump back into the story. We're starting PDF file here, page 5. The story itself, page 3, starting with paragraph 2. Let's begin. You can imagine from what I say that my poor sister Julia and I had no great pleasure in our lives. No servant would stay with us, and for a long time we did all the work of the house. She was but 30 at the time of her death, and yet her hair had already begun to whiten, even as mine has. Your sister is dead, then? She died just 2 years ago, and it is of her death that I wish to speak to you. You can understand that living the life which I have described, we were little likely to see anyone of our own age and position. We had, however, an aunt, my brother's maiden sister, Miss Ornelia Westphale, who lives near Harrow, and we were occasionally allowed to pay short visits at this lady's house. Julia went there at Christmas 2 years ago and met there a half-pay major of Marines to whom she became engaged. My stepfather learned of the engagement when my sister returned and offered no objection to the marriage, but within a fortnight of the day which had been fixed for the wedding, the terrible event occurred which has deprived me of my only companion. Okay, a couple things there. Let's flip back to our clues. So first off, we now know what she's there to talk about, which is the death of her sister, right? So that's going to be the big murder that we're going to be looking at, is who killed her sister, Julia. Next up, then, she mentions, and what we need to add is this clue right here, which is the murder occurs a fortnight, which if you don't know is 2 weeks, after Julia is engaged. Now remember, this is important because we had already mentioned that Dr. Roy Lott would lose part of his inheritance if his daughter's married. So some of that money would then go to Julia and away from Dr. Roy Lott. So that is important for motive, as we'll see going forward. All right, let's continue then. Picking up with Sherlock Holmes had been leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed and his head sunk in a cushion, but he half opened his lids now and glanced across at his visitor. Pray be precise as to the details, said he. It is easy for me to do so, for every event of that dreadful time is seared into my memory. The manor house is, as I have already said, very old, and only one wing is now inhabited. The bedrooms in this wing are on the ground floor, the sitting room being in the central block of the buildings. Of these bedrooms, the first is Dr. Roy Lott's, the second my sister's, and the third my own. There is no communication between them, but they all open into the same corridor. Do I make myself plain? Perfectly so. The windows of the 3 rooms open out upon the lawn. The fatal night Dr. Roylott had gone to his room early, though we knew that he had not retired to rest, for my sister was troubled by the smell of the strong Indian cigars, which it was his custom to smoke. She left her room, therefore, and came into mine, where she sat for some time chatting about her approaching wedding. At 11 o'clock she rose to leave, but she paused at the door and looked back. Tell me, Helen, said she, have you heard anyone whistle in the dead of night? Never, said I. I suppose that you could not possibly whistle yourself in your sleep. Certainly not. But why? Because the last few nights I have always, about 3 in the morning, heard a low, clear whistle. I'm a light sleeper, and it has awakened me. I cannot tell you where it came from, perhaps the next room, perhaps from the lawn. I thought that I would ask you as to whether you've heard of it. No, I have not. It must be those wretched gypsies in the plantation. Very likely. Yet if it were on the lawn, I wonder that you did not hear it also. Okay, let's pause there. Jump back to our notes here. And we need to add that Julia mentions hearing a low whistling sound at night. So it's not always what you see. Sometimes it's what you hear in these mystery stories. So this low whistling sound that Julia hears at night, important clue as to what could have happened to her. All right, once you have that down, let's flip back here. Going on then. Well, it is of no great consequence at any rate, she smiled back at me, closed my door, and a few moments later I heard her key turn in the lock. Indeed, said Holmes. Was it your custom always to lock yourself in at night? Always. And why? I think I mentioned to you that the doctor kept a cheetah and a baboon. We had no feeling of security unless our doors were locked. Okay, let's stop there, go back then, and add our next clue, which is that Helen is sure, absolutely sure, that Julia's room was locked that night, which means, as we get to our supposed murder here, as we'll see, no one could have gotten in the room that was not already in the room from the door anyway. Remember, we still have a window and chimney, as we'll see, but as far as we know, no one could have gotten through the room without a key. Okay, going on then. Quite so, pray proceed with your statement. I could not sleep that night. A vague feeling of impending misfortune impressed me. My sister and I, you will recollect, were twins, and you know how subtle are the links which bind two souls which are so closely allied. It was a wild night. The wind was howling outside, and the rain was beating and splashing against the windows. Suddenly, amid all the hubbub of the gale, there burst forth the wild scream of a terrified woman. I knew that it was my sister's voice. I sprang from my bed, wrapped a shawl around me, and rushed into the corridor. As I opened my door, I seemed to hear a low whistle, which, as my sister described, and a few moments later, a clanging sound, as if a mass of metal had fallen. As I ran down the passage, my sister's door was unlocked and revolved slowly upon its hinges. I stared at it, horror-stricken, not knowing what was about to issue forth from it. By the light of the corridor lamp, I saw my sister appear at the opening, her face blanched with terror, her hands groping for help, her whole figure swaying to and fro like that of a drunkard. I ran to her, threw my arms around her, but at that moment her knees seemed to give way, and she fell to the ground. She writhed as one who is in terrible pain, and her limbs were dreadfully convulsed. At first I thought it was she had not recognized me, but as I bent over her, she suddenly shrieked out in a voice which I shall never forget. Oh my God, Helen, it was the band, the Speckled band. There was something else, which she would have fain said, and she stabbed with her finger into the air in the direction of the doctor's room. But a fresh convulsion seized her and choked her words. I rushed out, calling loudly for my stepfather, and I met him hastening for his room in his dressing gown. When he reached my sister's side, she was unconscious, and though he poured brandy down her throat and sent for medical aid from the village, all efforts were in vain, for she slowly sank and died without having recovered her consciousness. Such was the dreadful end of my beloved sister. All right, so we have a particularly terrible death here. Describes her as swaying to and fro. She falls to the ground, writhes in terrible pain. So a particularly terrible death. Let's go ahead and start adding in here some of the notes that we have from this, or clues. So first off, we have the night of the murder, Helen hears Julia scream, a low whistle, and a metal clanging sound, in that order. So Julia screams, then a low whistle, then a metal clanging sound. All these in the order of these could be important to the story. So Helen hears Julia scream, a low whistle, metal clanging sound. Then we have Julia's final words, which were, oh my God, Helen, it was the band, the Speckled band. And then she points to the ceiling and then the doctor's room. But she points to the ceiling first. All right, those are our clues. Pause if you need to get those down, but we're going to go ahead and go on. Okay, going on then with Holmes here. One moment, said Holmes. Are you sure about the whistle and the metallic sound? Could you swear to it? That was what the county coroner asked me at the inquiry. It was my strong impression that I heard it, and yet among the crash of the gale and the creaking of an old house, I may possibly have been deceived. Was your sister dressed? No, she was in her nightdress. In her right hand was found the charred stump of a match, and in her left hand a matchbox, showing that she had struck a light, looked about her, and then her when the alarm took place. This is important. And what conclusions did the coroner come? He investigated the case with great care, for Dr. Roylott's conduct had been notorious in the county, but he was unable to find any satisfactory cause of death. My evidence showed that the door had been fastened upon the inner side, and the windows were blocked by an old-fashioned shutters with broad iron bars, which were secured every night. The walls were carefully sounded and were shown to be quite solid all around, and the flooring was also thoroughly examined, with the same result. The chimney was wide, but is barred up by 4 large staples. It is certain, therefore, that my sister was quite alone when she met her end. Besides, there were no marks of any violence upon her. How about poison? The doctors examined her for it, but without success. What do you think of this unfortunate lady died of, then? It is my belief that she died of pure fear and nervous shock, though what it was that frightened her, I cannot imagine. Okay, we're going to pause there here, and let's go ahead and go back. A couple other things to throw in here in our clues. One of them is there was no way to enter Julia's room that we know of, because the door is locked, the windows are locked, and then the chimney was blocked up. So no way to get in and out. They even said they checked the ceiling and the floors, no way to get in or out. We also know that the coroner checked her for poison, and she did not know of any known types of poison. She did not die from any known types of poison. So we know that that's not a possibility. Okay, going back then. I'm picking up with, were there gypsies in the plantation at the time? Yes, there were nearly always some there. And what did you gather from this allusion to a band, a speckled band? Sometimes I have thought that it was merely the wild talk of delirium. Sometimes that it may have referred to some band of people, perhaps to these very gypsies in the plantation. I do not know whether the spotted handkerchiefs, which so many of them wear over their heads, might have suggested the strange adjective which she used. Holmes shook his head like a man who is far from being satisfied. These are very deep waters, said he. Pray go on with your narrative. So let's go ahead and add in here real quick the gypsies. That the speckled band might be a reference to the headbands the gypsies wear. Right? So like the handkerchiefs they wear on their head, they're speckled or spotted. So she might be referring to one of the gypsies that might have attacked her in some way, shape, or form. Okay, going on then, it says 2 years have passed since then, and my life has been lately lonelier than ever. A month ago, however, a dear friend whom I have known for many years has done me the honor to ask my hand in marriage. His name is Armitage, Percy Armitage, the second son of Mr. Armitage of Cranewater near Reading. My stepfather has offered no opposition to the match, and we are to be married in the course of the spring. 2 days ago, some repairs were started in the west wing of the building, and my bedroom wall has been pierced, so that I have had to move into the chamber in which my sister died, and to sleep in the very bed in which she slept. Imagine then my thrill of terror when last night, as I lay awake thinking over her terrible fate, I suddenly heard in the silence of the night the low whistle which had been herald of her own death. I sprang up and lit the lamp, but nothing was to be seen in the room. I was too shaken to go to the bed again, however, so I dressed as soon as it was daylight. I slipped down, got a dog cart at the Crown Inn, which is opposite, and drove to Leatherhead, from whence I have come on this morning with the one object of seeing you and asking your advice. You have done wisely, said my friend, but have you told me all? Yes, all. Okay, let's go back here real quick. Our next note here, the same thing begins happening to Helen after she is engaged. So she's in the same room now, she hears the same whistling sound, and she's afraid the same thing's going to happen to her that happened to her sister. All right, going on then real quick here with our last part. Up at the top, Miss Roylott, you have not. You are screening your stepfather. What do you mean? For answers, Holmes pushes back the frill of the black lace which fringed the hand that lay upon our visitor's knee. 5 little vivid spots, the marks of 4 fingers and a thumb, were printed upon the white wrist. You have been cruelly used, said Holmes. So this right here telling us that Holmes noticed that she's bruised from her stepfather. So her stepfather, and the last thing we're going to write here, Dr. Roy Lott is abusing Julia, right? And we know that from the bruises on her arm left from his fingerprints there. So an example of abuse here. All right, let's go ahead and jump up then to our means, motive, and opportunity. So you guys will have question marks everywhere. However, we are going to fill out some. We're going to fill up some of those. So if you see our little thing that we have here, a table that we have here, who killed Julia? So means, motive, and opportunity. We're going to start over here with opportunity, and we're just going to go down each person and fill this out. Starting with Helen, who, yes, she did have opportunity because she was in the house at the time of the murder. So even though this is her sister, it's still possible she could be the murderer, and maybe she's trying to frame her father, something like that. So we need to have yes for opportunity. Motive, yes, maybe she's trying to increase her own inheritance. Right? Maybe, as I mentioned, she's trying to frame her stepfather to try to get rid of him, again, to increase her own inheritance. So she does have a motive as well. No means, though. None of these will have means because we don't know how they would have done it yet. Okay, going on to opportunity. Julia, which obviously if she kills herself, right, this would be a suicide. So obviously, yes, you would have opportunity. Motive, maybe the marriage that she had, she was not happy with, wanted to get out of it, couldn't think of a way, so committed suicide. Possibility there. Dr. Roy Lott, opportunity. Yes, he was in the house at the time of the murder, just like Helen was. And he has an obvious motive. He does not want to lose his inheritance, so we know that. So yes, he has a motive. Going on down to our gypsies then. Yes, they were on the property at the time of the murder. So they were there. They could have perpetrated it. And then motive. Theft. Maybe they were trying to steal something. Maybe they were hired by Dr. Roy Lott to murder his daughter, or stepdaughter, I should say. So motive there as well for gypsies. And then finally, the wild animals, the cheetah, the baboon. Yes, they were on the property at the time of the murder, so they have opportunity. They don't need a motive, really. Wild animals attack people, although maybe they were trained by Dr. Roy Lott, so you could have a motive, although you don't need one, again, for wild animals. Okay, we are going to stop there today then, everyone, and I will talk to you in part 3 of the Adventure of the Speckled Band.